Welcome to the Supplementary Reader in English for Class 10, Footprints Without Feet. This book is meant for students to read on their own, develop reading skills, and at the same time read for information and pleasure. They need to learn to read critically and develop confidence. After all, reading is the key to learning. So today, let's join hands and enjoy the first lesson of the book, A Triumph of Surgery by James NCERT. Let's go to the objectives. One of the objectives is to develop the habit of reading for information and pleasure, drawing inferences from what they read and relating texts to their previous knowledge, to learn reading critically and to develop the confidence to ask and answer questions, to encourage the learners express their own ideas in a creative and coherent way, to promote the habit of self-learning and reduce dependence on the teacher, and critically analyze the effects of pampering on children. First of all, let us know about the author, James Alfred Witt. He was born on 3rd October 1916 and passed away on 23rd of February 1995. He was known by the pen name James NCERT. He was a British veterinary surgeon and writer who used his years of experiences as a veterinary surgeon to write a series of books, each consisting of stories about animals and their owners. Some of his famous works include Dog Stories, Every Living Things, Cat Stories, All Creatures, Great and Small. Now, students, coming back to the story, let's have a quick look at what it deals with. Students, the story focuses on Tricky, a pet dog who is owned by a rich lady, Mrs. Pomfrey. She loves her dog so much that she is unable to refuse him anything he wants. As a result, Tricky becomes hugely fat and listless. His refusal to move normally becomes a case of concern for the lady. So the narrator suggests cutting down on food and giving him enough exercise. The lady agrees, but she is not able to implement the same. Ultimately, the doctor, who happens to be the narrator, agrees to take Tricky and keep him under observation for a fortnight. The surgery begins. Only the water is given for the first 2 days. Tricky shows slight improvement. The third day saw Tricky trotting out along with the other hounds. The gradual improvement was watched with satisfaction. Mrs. Pomfrey sends in rich food and drinks for Tricky, which in turn was enjoyed by the doctor and inmates. A fortnight later, Mrs. Pomfrey comes to collect her pet. Overjoyed and filled with gratitude, she declares it to be a triumph of surgery. So dear students, on broader perspective, we can divide the story into 3 parts. First part, Tricky and his problems. Subsequent arrival of doctor. Second part deals with Turkey's actual surgery. And students, do you know that the third part talks about Turkey's recovery and Mrs. Pomfrey's reaction? So students, now let's assess ourselves. So can you see the picture? In these pictures, which one would you prefer to be? So students, have a glance and let me know what you prefer to be. Alright, I think all of you must have come to the conclusion that you all would like to be full of love, energy and life. So students, that was just opposite of what was happening to Tricky. He was hugely fat, like a blotted sausage, eyes bloodshot and rheumy, and his tongue lolling out, and he was very listless. On seeing Tricky's condition, the doctor suggested Mrs. Pomfrey to cut down his food right away and give him more exercise and to follow strict diet. Her initial reaction was that she was nervous. She wrung her hands and then she sets off with a so-called determined look to follow the instructions. As Mrs. Pomfrey tries to pull along with Tricky, the doctor notices that Tricky was tottering along in his tweeted coat and struggling and drooping in her harness. Students, as expected, one fine day, Mrs. Pomfrey called the doctor for the advice. She sounded distraught, reporting that Tricky was refusing to have any food, having bouts of vomiting, lying on the rug, restless and panting. Thereafter, students, the doctor had made a quick decision. He decided to take Tricky out of the house for a period since he needed to be hospitalized and kept under observation for about a fortnight. Hearing this, Mrs. Pomfrey almost swoons, but the determined doctor carries the dog to his car and speeds off. And with the dramatic exit, Mrs. Pomfrey was left wailing and trying to throw an armful of Tricky's little coats through the window. So students, now that we have come to the end of the first part of the lesson, let's go through some of the words that occurred along the way. So dear students, the list below displays the number of words along with its meaning. Now what you have to do, you note down these meanings in your notebook. I will pronounce each word and you can practice the pronunciation of these words at your own too. So let me begin with the first one. Mistress, bloated, sausage, bloodshot, rheumy, lulled, stunned, listless, relent, lumbago, rung, regime, tottering, drooping, harness, distraught, bouts, panting, fortnight, soon, pine, take a firm line, wailing, despairing, pathetic, gasping, wag, to have no kick. So dear students, till now we were all trying to know the theme and different dimensions of the first part. Now the ball is in your court because you have to take a test before we wind up this first part of the chapter. So, wish you all the best.
Children, I will be uploading a story. Watch it and enjoy. And I hope the next time we meet, you will be like Dave, the reformed character in the story, healthy and fit. Because I believe healthy kids always learn better. That's all for today. Till we meet again, thank you.
Dave loved eating chocolates, pizzas, burgers, and everything else that was called junk. He ate junk food for every meal of the day. Honey, it's fine to have all of this once in a while, but you must eat healthy foods like vegetables, cereals, breads, fruits, chicken, fish, etc. Dave just kept ignoring any advice. One day, his mum decided that she won't cook food for Dave. She told him to feed himself. He ordered in pizzas, burgers, and Chinese. Having freedom to eat anything made him extremely happy. Every day, Dave would go out and eat chocolates, chips, and all sorts of street and junk food. Gradually, however, he realized that he wasn't enjoying outside food as much as he did before. He started to feel sick and lazy and decided to go to a doctor. When Dave put on his shirt, all of his shirt's buttons popped out. What? My shirt has shrunk. Next he tried to put on his pants, but they too didn't fit him anymore. Dave tried to fit into all of his clothes, but every shirt popped and every pant ripped. All of my clothes have shrunk. What do I do now? He began to cry and felt confused. Dave decided to starve himself to lose weight, but whenever he felt hungry, he lost control and ended up eating junk food again. Soon he became bigger and it became difficult for him to walk. He felt lazy all the time. At school, everyone began to call him Fatty, which made him sad. One day, he went to Mom and told her everything. I told you not to eat so much junk food, and now look at what it has done to you. But what should I do now? Control. The best way to stay healthy is to have healthy food. You can enjoy your favorite food once in a while, but have a balanced diet. Exercise regularly, have fresh fruits and vegetables, and drink lots of water. Dave felt encouraged. He began eating vegetables and fruits. He exercised daily, and once in a while he would treat himself with a small burger or fries. Soon he was back into normal shape. Nobody made fun of him at school. His mom felt proud of him, and he felt happier than before.
Dear students, let me welcome you all to the second part of A Tramp of Surgery. Dear students, before we could switch over from the first part to the second part, let me once again take you back to the first part. So here the first part of the story in nutshell begins. Tricky is a small dog, pampered and overfed by his rich mistress, Mrs. Pomfrey. She loves her dog very much and is unable to refuse him anything he wants. Tricky, who is fond of cream cakes and chocolates, but as a result, he became unusually fat and lazy. Mrs. Pomfrey believes that he became lazy because he is suffering from malnutrition. So she started giving him some little extras between meals like malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks at night to build him up. While talking to Mrs. Pomfrey, the doctor realizes that she has been overfeeding Tricky and not giving him enough exercise, due to which Tricky had started looking like a bloated sausage. The doctor advises her to stop giving him unhealthy things to eat. But poor Mrs. Pomfrey, she is not able to refuse anything to the dog. Tricky falls sick and the doctor is called for. The doctor, who could not bear him suffering any longer, suggested to get him hospitalized for 15 days. Mrs. Pomfrey does not want to send him away, but the firm doctor somehow takes Tricky to the hospital. So dear students, I think and I hope you all must be very excited to know what happens in the second part of the story. So, please allow me to remove these layers of excitement. So here, the second part of the story begins. The surgery begins. The scene is at the doctor's house. He is surrounded by dogs, but Tricky looks on with his dull eyes lying listless on the carpet. Finding him uninteresting, the other dogs ignore him. The doctor makes a warm bed for Tricky and keeps him on a strict diet for 2 days. No food, just water. At the end of the second day, everything looks so interesting for Tricky. But on the third day, Tricky could no longer contain himself. He whimpers in pain and sorrow to hear the other dogs in the yard. The doctor opens the door to see, and what caught his eyes pleased him immensely. Tricky was trotting out of the house and immediately engulfed by the greyhounds and his friends. It was a fun time for all of them. After a quick inspection of Tricky by the greyhounds, they move down to the garden. Tricky tries to follow them, but the surplus fat prevents him from keeping pace with his friends. Later on the same day, it was feeding time. There was the usual rush and the sound of high-speed eating, each one trying to outdo the other. Tricky, left behind, had no choice but to lick casually inside 1 or 2 bowls after everyone had finished. So the next day, Tricky was provided with an extra bowl and he was very excited. And then came the great moment, the rapid progress of his recovery. No medical treatment, but just the joy of bowled over, tramped on and squashed every few minutes is soon discovered by Tricky. So dear students, do you know what happens next? He became an accepted member of the gang, even fighting like a tiger for his share at meal times and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. Maybe it was the best days of his life. Meanwhile, Mrs. Pumphrey was getting anxious and made repeated calls to the doctor. Her queries about Tricky's diet and clothings went unanswered. Dear students, do you know what was the reaction of the doctor? Let me tell you. The doctor avoided answering silly questions, but calmly informed that Tricky was out of danger and convulsing fast. Hearing the doctor's words, Mrs. Pumphrey got excited and immediately decided that something had to be done. She got into action immediately. She started to send fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build Tricky's strength. It didn't stop with that. Later on, it was wine and brandy as well. It goes to say that the doctor never gave any of these to Tricky, but instead it was a Christmas party for him and his partners. 2 eggs for breakfast, midday meal with wine, and finishing up the day with brandy. So dear students, now it's a turn of my question for you. So get ready with the question. The question is, do you think the doctor was successful in curing Tricky? Was he right in not giving food to Tricky? Now it's your turn to write down your answers in your own notebook. Dear students, we will continue with the story the second time we will all meet together. Till then, take care of yourself. So allow me to say bye. Dear students, today we will all enter the concluding part of the story, A Triumph of Surgery. Do you remember the story so far? Food stocks kept coming in from Mrs. Pumphrey at regular intervals. The stocks gave a temptation to the doctor to keep Tricky as a permanent guest. But then he realized Mrs. Pumphrey must be getting anxious and impatient. I need to call her immediately. The doctor puts in a call to Mrs. Pumphrey.
Hello, Mrs. Pumphrey. Good morning. It's a pleasure talking to you. Don't you want to hear about your Tricky? Oh, he has fully recovered and waiting for you.
The excited Mrs. Pumphrey couldn't control her eagerness. She said,
"Oh, hello, doctor. That's great news. I'm coming. I'm so happy. I can't wait to see my baby."
Sure enough, Mrs. Pumphrey arrives at the doctor's clinic within 10 minutes in an expensive-looking car. The chauffeur opens the door to reveal the rich interior of the car. Mr. Heriot is impressed but couldn't decide the better of the two, Mrs. Pumphrey or the interior. And then, in her usual excited tone, she asked,
"Oh, Mr. Harriet, to tell me the truth, is Tricky really better?"
The doctor, in a cool voice, replied,
Of course he is fine, ma'am. Don't trouble to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him.
And then the doctor walks into the garden to find the dogs hurtling around and playing to their hearts' content. And amidst their midst, he could see little Tricky, shining little beauty. The doctor bends and remarks,
What a change! You have really transformed yourself within 2 weeks. Good boy.
With these words, the doctor carries Tricky along the passage to the front.
Come on, buddy. It's time to say goodbye to your friends. You're going home.
Tricky is missed by his beautiful friends. At the front door, the chauffeur was waiting with the door of the car ajar. No sooner Tricky sees his mistress, he couldn't restrain himself. He leaps out of the doctor's arms in lightning speed and lands straight on to her lap. Mrs. Pomfrey was overjoyed. In the meantime, Tricky's belongings are brought out. Needless to say, they were never used and were brought back from the house. Mrs. Pomfrey leans out of the window. There were tears of joy in her eyes. Her lips trembled.
Mr. Harriet, I cannot thank you enough. This is indeed a triumph of surgery.
And yes, dear students, it was indeed a triumph of surgery. Now, it's time to check your understanding. So, dear students, please write down your answers in your notebook. I really hope you have reasons to smile. And I hope my little thank you note is another good reason. Thank you.